All right. Welcome, guys, to another reading vocabulary conversation lesson. We're going to jump right into it. So let me open our Ingu website, which we always use for our articles. As I always say, you can come here and read more articles on your own. They have a lot of things to read and different levels. So you can see intermediate, advanced. They have, and even within those, you see different levels. Like there's intermediate 5, intermediate 6. So let's go right into it and see. This is right up my alley. Party like it's 1999 with this 90s slang. Let's get a bit of nostalgia. All right. So as always, we'll start with the vocabulary. I'm going to read it. I'd like you to hit pause afterwards and then read it yourself. Make sure you got the pronunciation down. Make sure you understand the definition of it. And then we'll continue. So the first word we have decade, a period of 10 years, a period of 10 years that begins with a year ending in 0. Globally, the number of smokers has gone up over the past 3 decades. And also just a reminder, there are more example sentences if you click on the little arrows. So the 1960s was a decade of great cultural change in the United States. All right, next one we've got term, a word or phrase. And this article is difficult to understand because a lot of scientific terms are used. Okay, next one, babysit, to take care of someone's children for a short time. My neighbor asked me to babysit her daughter on Saturday afternoon. Then we've got jewelry, objects worn as decoration, usually made of valuable metals and stones. This is a very valuable piece of jewelry. Next one, accessory, a small object carried or worn to improve the appearance of an outfit or item of clothing. Accessories are a great way to add some personality to your look. And then last one, compliment, a comment that says something positive about someone or something. I got so many compliments on my dress today. Okay, let's move right on then to our actual article. Again, I'm going to read the whole article. You can hit pause after each little paragraph and read it yourself, or wait all the way till the end and then read the whole article at once. So let's start. Party like it's 1999 with this 90s slang. Every decade has its own slang. Some terms stay in the English language for a long time, while others might be better to forget. But either way, here's some totally rad or really cool slang from the 90s. How did people in the 90s say that something was impossible and not going to happen with a simple as if? Sorry. This is so the language they used when I grew up. All right, the next one. So if it was 1997 and you were making weekend plans, your friend might say, my mom wants me to babysit on Friday, as if we're going to that party. Okay, to make it clear to your listener that you just didn't care about something, you could just say whatever. This was also a great way to tell someone you didn't agree, but you didn't want to argue with them. So you might so you might tell your friend that maybe they should help their mom instead of going to the party, and they could answer whatever. I want to have some fun. The 1990s gave us what is still common slang for expensive looking jewelry, clothes, and other accessories, bling, or sometimes even bling bling. Bling bling was even put in the Oxford English Dictionary in 2003. Deciding your friend was right, you could say, okay, let's go to the party. I have some new bling to wear too. When you're dressed for the party and look really good, your friend might say, you're all that and a bag of chips. This is an example of a slang phrase you probably won't hear today, but it was a big compliment in the 1990s, meaning to be really great. Okay. Funny to hear some of those kind of sentences. So let's jump right into our discussion. Again, you can I'll read the question and you can either hit pause and answer it and then listen to what I say, or you can listen to my answer and then you can respond and maybe you agree with something or you want to add something. Up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. Number one, which of the expressions in the article did you find interesting? Um, all of the expressions were very common, but I must say the last one, all that in a bag of chips, I do know it, but it's not something that I really used or that my friends used. So that was funny to hear again because it's not something that was familiar, even though I did know it. All right. Number two, what comes to mind when you think of the 90s? Uh, I would say my childhood. I think it was a time of people could have more innocent fun, but in a, how can I say, you could have mischievous, innocent fun. I don't know if that comes through clear, but it's like they could say and do things that would be very inappropriate today, and they would just be like, children. It was, I don't know, it was a different time, and but still, I think of the 90s as good times, good times. Number three, do you know of any 90s slang from your country? Well, all of that was um, pretty common from South Africa in the 90s. I don't know. We used most of the American slang actually because we grew up with American television. So, yeah, all the American slang is what we used. Yeah. Number four, are there any slang terms you used to use that aren't common anymore? Um, I don't know if it's not common anymore. I'm not going to remember it. Maybe did they say rad? Something's rad. It's like, yeah, that's a rad movie. Yeah, that's something that people used to say that they don't use anymore at all. Yeah. I think that's also short for radical, which means kind of like extreme. So it's like, oh, that's a rad movie. That's a radical, extreme movie, crazy movie. Okay, number five. Do you still use a lot of slang terms from when you were younger? Um, I mean, I don't know if cool. I still use cool quite a lot. That's a cool movie, or that was something is cool. And but yeah, yeah, that's the only thing that I kind of still use a lot. All right, on to our further discussion. Have you seen many 90s movies or TV shows? Oh man, I I love 90s movies. I actually just watched one today, Dogma, which was back then it was kind of a it's a movie where it's got a kind of a religious topic, and back then people were a lot more conservative, so everyone was like, no, you can't watch that movie because they're making fun of religion. And I rewatched it today, and it's got a religious topic, but some of the things they say is kind of true, and it's funny and things in between. But I think back then people were a lot more conservative regarding religious themes in movies. But I love watching 90s movies. I'm rewatching so many. I watched, okay, this is not 90s. This is actually before that. I watched what's the thing with the plant that eats the people? It's not the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Little Shop of Horrors. I watched that the other day, and I watched Time Cop the other day with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I love watching 90s movies. All right. Are you a fan of any 90s music? When did you first hear it? Yeah, I love 90s music. Certain things. Again, I mean, a lot of the things that I listened to in the 90s were made in the 80s, so a lot of Queen, a lot of these metal bands like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, all of these things, they came from the 80s and 90s kind of. Nirvana, there's a lot of great music from the 90s. What do you think of fashion from the 1990s? Oh, that's one thing. I love the movies, I love the music, but the fashion was terrible. It was really bad. Um, no, 90s fashion's the worst. 80s, initially I thought like 80s was terrible, but now it seemed like 80s is making a resurgence, and I think they're trying to hit that nostalgic note with a lot of people. And so I'm seeing a lot of 80s kind of styles coming back again. And I think with time, if you people will think like something is old fashioned, and then with enough time that passes, it kind of comes back again, you know. So when I was younger, the 70s was like kind of a cool era. Nobody kind of liked the 80s in the 90s. Um, and the 60s was also 60s and 70s were cool when I was growing up. So now that I'm older, the 80s is kind of cool again. So I'm sure in a couple of years, people might come back to the 90s like, oh, yeah, let's part our hair and let's dress like all this crazy clothes they wore back then. So, but at the moment, I don't like 90s fashion. Next question. In your opinion, what was the coolest decade of the 20th century? I'm gonna, for me, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, I'll probably go with like the 80s. But if I have to be honest, I'm a little bit biased in that regard. But if I have to be honest, probably the 70s has to be considered the coolest, you know, with the hippies and freedom and love and all of that. Um, Probably going to be the 70s. That's the coolest decade. But man, it's difficult because if you go back even further they had a more, you know, the 70s were a lot of like sex and drugs and all of these people kind of rebelled. If you go back further, like the 30s, it's more of like a classical, how can I say, cool period, more of a pure, innocent time. So, but just in terms of like they say, the coolest, probably the 70s. Yeah. All right. Number five, if you could go back in time, what decades would you most like to live through? Live through. Brr. Um, you don't want to go too far back because back then times were difficult and times were tough. Technology made things a lot easier for us now. So I don't want to go too far back, even though I think, like I said before, times were a lot more innocent and pure. Um, I don't want to go too far back because I think it was very difficult. So I think the 80s, maybe like the 70s and 80s. If I could, yeah, like the cool 70s and then the 80s also kind of nice. Yeah, 70s, 80s, I would say. All right. Oh, that was it. It was kind of a fast one. The questions were not too intense to discuss. Let me stop that over there. And we're going to wrap it up for that for today. So I'm going to try and post, like I said, 5 days a week. I'll try and post things so there's every day something for you to do. It's not a lot of time. It's just 10 between 10 and 20 minutes, you know, so you can do every day do something in English. Try and even if it's just listen, but you have to when you do these lessons, you have to speak, you have to say, talk. All right. So just try and do a little bit every day and you'll improve a little bit every day. Okay, have a good evening. See you next time. Bye bye.